The title of my presentation is called Basic Hygiene Practices for the Catering Sector. I'll just start off by just talking a brief outline of the company that I work for, which is Snap Tactics Consulting Private Limited. We are a company that is based in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and we offer consulting and training services which focus on quality management systems based on ISO 9001, as well as ISO IEC 17025, which is a laboratory management system standard. And we also offer services in ISO 22000, which is the food safety management system standard. And we also offer for catering, manufacturing, and horticultural sectors. And just a brief background on myself. I have got experience in chemical and microbiological testing. I've also had experience in product certification practices, as well as internal audits for ISO IEC 17025 and ISO IEC 17021, which is an accreditation standard for certification bodies. And I'm also currently an external auditor for quality management systems. Okay, the motivation for my presentation today is basically based on the numerous cases around the world with regards to food poisoning. And according to the American statistics, it is estimated that annually at least one person in 6 Americans gets food poisoning. So to me, America is a developed country. So if the statistics are that high in a developed country where they've got better resources, better infrastructure, what more in the developed world where the infrastructure and the resources are not as good? So I believe that probably one of the reasons why we've got numerous cases of food poisoning around the world is probably because, you know, the term familiarity breeds contempt. So we may be having some food handlers who've been in the industry for long periods, and because they've been there for a long time, they begin to maybe take shortcuts in the way they do things. Maybe they forget the reasons why they need to do certain things, and they basically start breaking the rules of food hygiene. And also I find that in some cases, some food handlers who have been engaged in certain catering establishments are not exposed, or maybe they don't have prior training with regards to good food hygiene practices. And also, when they are engaged in these food establishments, nobody takes the time to at least train them with regards to food hygiene. And also, in addition, some countries, especially the developed countries, it's not mandatory to have food handlers undergoing refresher courses. So if any training does take place, maybe it may take place when they engage new staff, but then from then on, nobody takes the time to at least do refresher trainings to remind the food handlers with regards to basic food hygiene principles. Okay, we'll start off by looking at some of the basic definitions or the common terms that are used when we talk about maybe food or food safety. So we'll start off by looking at the definition for food hygiene. This is basically the measures that we take to ensure that food is safe and fit to eat. And then we have contamination, which is basically the introduction or occurrence in food of any germs or bacteria or microorganisms or chemicals, foreign material, spoilage agents, taints, unwanted or diseased matter, which may compromise food safety or wholesomeness. And then we also talk about hazards, which are basically anything dangerous which finds its way into food and may cause harm to a person who eats that particular food. So you'll find that some contaminants are hazards, while some of them are basically harmless and may affect food appeal. And maybe on the ones that affect food appeal, you can have maybe hair pieces of hair or ants in food. So nobody wants to have a meal where there are lots of ants inside, but you find that ants are basically not harmful at all. So you see that some contaminants are hazards and some of them are just basically harmless. But then the food safety contaminants can be classified into 4 groups. The first being the microbiological contaminants. So these ones involve viruses, molds, parasites, and harmful bacteria or germs. And normally the microbiological contaminants, they proliferate when food is kept maybe at room temperature. So the temperature is conducive for them to multiply such that they end up becoming hazards. And then we've got the chemical contamination, which involves chemicals getting into food, such as maybe cleaning products, the detergents that you're using for cleaning maybe your utensils, as well as pest control chemicals that you may be using maybe in your kitchen or your food establishment. And then we've got physical contaminants. These are basically objects which get into food, or physical objects which somehow find their way into food. And we've got examples like the insects, hair, broken glass, pieces of packaging, metals, stones, and pieces of wood. And then we have the allergies. So you'll find that there are some foods that have been found to cause allergic or food intolerance responses in certain sensitive people. And these foods have been identified as peanuts, eggs, milk products, shellfish, soya beans, which somehow cause some allergic reactions in certain people, and they can then become a hazard to those people. So what are the impacts of the food hazards on people? The first we can have is injury, whereby maybe you can have dental damage or cuts resulting, and normally this results from the presence of physical contaminants in food. And the dental damage, maybe you are chewing on a piece of metal that somehow found its way into food, and you damage your teeth because you're not expecting to be chewing on metal, and maybe you're grinding hard there and your tooth happens to break. And cuts maybe can result from maybe the presence of some sharp objects which may somehow have found their way into the food. And then the second impact is illness or food poisoning, and you can have symptoms such as stomach pains, diarrhea, vomiting, typhoid, fever, or dysentery. And then the third impact that can result from food hazards is death. And this can occur maybe through choking or through illness or food poisoning. And also some allergic reactions can also result in death. So those are the impacts of food hazards on us. And then just looking at the basic food hygiene practices to prevent maybe food contamination, the staff in these food catering establishments need to practice basic food hygiene techniques. And these basic food hygiene techniques consist of keeping yourself clean and wearing clean clothing and ensuring that your hair is tied back and covered. And also you should wash your hands thoroughly before handling food, after using the toilet, after handling raw foods or waste, before you resume work, or before you resume food handling, after taking a break, or after blowing your nose. And then that picture just shows maybe the areas to concentrate on when you're washing your hands. You need to focus on the palms, in between the fingers, the backs of the hands, the base of the thumbs, the back of the fingers, the fingernails, as well as the wrists. And also you need to rinse, obviously, when you're washing your hands, there's got to be some soap or detergents that you're using to assist in your hand washing there. And you need to rinse and to wipe your hands dry after rinsing. And the hand washing facilities which are present in your food catering establishment, they need to be accessible to all the food handlers. And also these hand washing facilities should only be used for the washing of hands. You shouldn't start dipping mops that you're going to use to clean the floor into these hand washing facilities, because you are going to contaminate your hand washing facilities and also in the end contaminate the food that you're going to handle. The hand washing facilities need to be provided with soap and warm water, and as well as disposable towels for the drying of the hands. And there should be a bin provided to put maybe your disposable towels after you use them. Right, and then if any staff member maybe develops some kind of infection or has some wounds, they are advised to notify their supervisors so that at least the supervisor reallocates them duties so that they don't handle food. So you're not supposed to handle food if you've got some type of infection or some kind of wound. So you need to be given other duties that don't involve you handling food. And then if you've got cuts or sores, you need to cover those with a waterproof and high visibility dressing. So the waterproof dressing there is to prevent the spreading of infection from your sores and your cuts. And the high visibility dressing should be brightly colored so that if by chance it happens to fall into the food, it can be easily identified such that that food is either disposed of and it doesn't get served to the guest. So you don't want your guest to discover your wound dressing just as they're about to put a spoonful of food into their mouth. You're not supposed to smoke, eat, or drink in a food preparation area, and you're not supposed to cough or sneeze over food. And then if you've got perishable foods, those should either be kept refrigerated or piping hot. That is, if you're not serving those foods at that particular moment. So you need to make sure that you are storing them at the appropriate temperatures. And basically, the perishable foods are those foods that can spoil easily. And they are normally spoiled by the growth of those perishable foods. And examples of perishable foods include meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, dairy foods, gravies. Okay, and then that picture just shows you the temperatures, the recommended temperatures for storing food. So if you're going to keep food hot, it should be above 65 or thereabouts. It should be above 65 degrees Celsius, and your refrigeration temperatures should be below 8 degrees Celsius. So the range between 8 degrees and 65 degrees, basically that's considered the danger zone, which basically means that that's the temperature range where bacteria can grow freely. So if you have perishable foods, you have to make sure that their temperature is not within that danger zone, that is between 8 degrees and 65 degrees Celsius. And then when you're preparing raw food as well as cooked food, maybe at the same time, you should not keep those foods together. They should strictly be kept separate. And you can make use of maybe some color-coded chopping boards, whereby maybe you can have a red chopping board for meat, a yellow one for poultry, a blue one for cooked foods, a brown one for seafood, a green one for fruits and vegetables, and a gray one for dairy products. So the use of the color-coded chopping boards is just to assist you in making sure that maybe you're not putting cooked foods on a red, or you're not preparing cooked foods on a red chopping board, which is usually reserved for meat. So because you're obviously going to contaminate that cooked food through the chopping board. So if you just maintain the color codes and everybody knows which board is for what, then you minimize your risk of contaminating food. And then when you're heating, at least reaches a temperature of 72 degrees Celsius before serving. Because bacteria is known to die around 60 degrees. So when you're reheating food, you're saying there's a chance that there are quite a number of bacteria already present in that food. And then if you raise the temperature to at least 72 degrees Celsius, then you're ensuring that the bacteria gets killed and the food is then safe to eat. And then it's not advisable to prepare food too far in advance of service. So let's say maybe you need food in 3 days' time. You know that you are supposed to serve a certain dish in 3 days' time. It's not advisable to prepare that food maybe today and then store it, because you increase the chances of maybe food contamination of that food, such that by the time you serve it, it's no longer wholesome or it's no longer fit to eat. And also maybe if you're going to serve a dish in the evening, and close to it, prepare it at that time and have it sitting the whole day before you serve in the evening. And then it is recommended that you clean as you go. So if you happen to make any spills, maybe during food preparation, those spills should be cleaned up immediately. You shouldn't leave the spills to sit the whole day and maybe clean them at the end of the day when you're about to knock off, because you are giving bacteria grounds to breed, and hence you increase the chances of contaminating the food that you are preparing throughout the day. So clean as you go and keep all your equipment and surfaces clean. And it's also recommended to use paper towels rather than tea towels or cloth towels, because if you're using cloths, you may be in a busy kitchen where maybe you don't have time to be washing these cloths. And you find that if the cloths don't get washed, then you increase the chances of contaminating your food through the use of dirty towels. But then the paper towels now, you are likely to use them once and then dispose. So it's much safer. Use, then you'll have to make sure in hot water with detergent and sanitized after every use. So at all times, you need to make sure that the tea towels that you're using are clean. And then it's recommended to air dry equipment rather than to dry them using towels, for the obvious reasons that the towel is most likely to be contaminated, especially, or to have some dirt that maybe is not quite visible. But then if it's not possible to air dry, then you can make use of your tea towels, but they should be clean. You need to make sure that your towels are clean if you are going to use them for drying equipment as well. And then never use utensils, crockery, or other equipment that is chipped, cracked, torn, frayed, or broken. The reason being that cracked equipment, the cracks basically harbor food particles, and then they present a breeding ground for your bacteria within those cracks. And also, broken equipment basically raises the chances of physical contamination, because you can have some pieces breaking off and falling into the food, and then you then have the injuries resulting that we've talked about. So make sure that your equipment is in good condition when you're using it in the kitchen. And it's advised to follow any instructions which are on the packaging of the food that you are preparing or the food that you're using in your kitchen. So you need to pay attention to the cooking times that are stated, the best before dates or the expiry dates, and any other maybe storage conditions which are highlighted on the packaging. So you need to make sure that you follow whatever is written on the package. And basically, staff in a food catering establishment are encouraged to always be on the lookout for things that go wrong, or for anything that is wrong within their establishment, and to tell management so that at least corrective action can be taken to sort out those issues and hence minimize food safety issues. Okay, then now we are going to focus a bit more on bacterial food poisoning. You remember when I talked about the microbial groups of contaminants, we mentioned viruses, yeast and molds, as well as bacteria. But I won't talk about the other ones. We'll just focus on bacteria, because bacteria is the common microorganism that is usually the culprit for food poisoning. So you find that for bacteria to proliferate, they need to have 5 conditions, which are the presence of water, they need food to grow, they need to be exposed to the correct temperatures, and they also need to be given time to grow, and they also need the presence of oxygen. But there are some bacteria types that don't need oxygen, so they can still grow even though the oxygen may not be present. So provided with these 5 conditions, the bacteria will multiply by dividing every 10 or so minutes, and they are dividing into 2 every 10 or so minutes. So each bacteria that then results divides into 2. So you find that after 6 hours, one bacterial cell can multiply to over 200,000 bacterial cells, and that's more than enough to cause food poisoning. So the food poisoning from bacteria can occur in maybe in two areas, in the sense that their population, if it reaches a certain number, it can be enough to just cause food poisoning. But then the other thing is that some bacteria produce toxins. So the more they are, the more toxins there are in the food, and hence the toxins are the ones that result in food poisoning. So the food poisoning can occur from two aspects, either the population of the bacteria as well as the toxins that the bacteria is producing. So that picture just shows us the exponential growth of bacteria. So you can start off with one bacteria cell, and then it divides. Within 5 hours, there'll be over 3 million bacterial cells, depending on the type of bacteria that is present. So where does this bacteria come from? How does it enter our food premises? Food poisoning bacteria basically come from 5 main sources. The first being the food handlers themselves. The food handlers are touching so many things as they're preparing food. They're touching packaging, they're touching equipment, they're touching food surfaces. So the various areas that they're touching, they're picking up certain types of bacteria, they're picking up certain types of contaminants, and hence their hands now, when they handle food, they transfer the bacteria from all those other sources onto the food. And also the raw foods are known to contain bacteria because of the fact that they are raw. And also maybe maybe like for meat, when they were killing the animal, they may have been some contamination with other parts of that particular animal. So it's safe to say that raw foods contain bacteria. And then the presence of raw foods in your kitchen become a source of bacteria as well. The presence of pests and animals, you know that pests are all over the place. They go to waste, they go in various crevices that you don't know what may be in there, and they're picking up bacteria. So now when they come into contact with food, they're depositing those bacterial cells onto the food. And also the air and the dust within your food catering establishment can also contain bacteria. And then your food, if your food is left open, the dust may settle onto the food, and hence your food becomes contaminated with the bacteria. And also the dirt and the food waste which is present in your kitchen. If there is dirt and food waste, that can be a source of bacteria for whatever food you are preparing in that kitchen. So those are basically the 5 sources of bacteria in a food catering establishment. And then what are the conditions that can promote these bacterial hazards to proliferate? The first, obviously, is the incorrect temperatures, where we were saying that your food needs to be kept either below 8 degrees Celsius or above 65 degrees Celsius. So your food should not be within the danger zone of the food. And also, if your food is exposed to maybe temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius, the cooler temperatures don't kill bacteria, but they just make the bacteria dormant, especially the freezing temperatures. They just make the bacteria go into hibernation, so to speak, but the bacteria is still present there. So if the food is brought up to room temperature or to temperatures within the danger zone, then they can become active and start to multiply. And then temperatures above 60 or 65 degrees, they are preferred because the bacteria is known to die at 60 degrees Celsius. So you need to make sure that you are keeping your foods either in cooler temperatures below 8 degrees Celsius or in hot temperatures above 65 degrees Celsius to make sure that you don't give your foods, especially the perishable foods, you don't give them the risk of bacterial hazards proliferating. And then the second aspect that can promote bacterial hazards is cross-contamination, which is basically when food becomes contaminated with bacteria from another source. And this bacteria can be contaminated or cross-contaminated with equipment, dirty tea towels, the presence of raw food and pests. And also cross-contamination can occur when you are mixing, like maybe when you're storing food, you put cooked food together with raw food. And also if your cooked food is stored uncovered, you increase the chances of cross-contamination. And also if you store cooked food below raw food, then you increase the risk of contamination with the raw food, in the sense that some juices from the raw food can drip onto the cooked food and hence contaminate it. So if you're going to store, maybe in a refrigerator, you're going to store cooked and raw food together, you need to make sure that the cooked food is above the raw food to avoid the chances of cross-contamination. And then another condition for promoting bacterial hazards is poor personal hygiene. We've talked about some aspects of personal hygiene earlier on in the presentation, but we'll just look at a few examples of poor personal hygiene. And these include dirty hands and clothing, having uncovered wounds or cuts, having long dirty fingernails, having excessive jewelry on hands and wrists, coughing and sneezing over food, handling food when you're sick, and not washing your hands after going to the toilet or maybe after taking a break. So those are just some of the aspects of poor personal hygiene. And then also having unclean food premises can also increase the chances of bacterial hazards in your food. Imagine if a food coming from that kitchen, which is depicted in that picture, what are the chances that it's most likely to be contaminated? The chances are very high coming from a kitchen like that. So basically, you should try and keep your kitchens clean to minimize the chances of bacterial contamination. And then having pest control methods within your food establishment can also promote bacterial hazards. The common pests that are usually found in food catering establishments, you have your rats and the mice, you have the flies and the cockroaches. So these pests, like I said, they go into so many areas and they visit so many dirty places, and hence they are picking up various types of bacteria from all the places that they've been to. And when they come into contact with food, they are depositing that bacteria onto the food. And also, they can also result in physical contamination in the sense that they may drop their droppings onto your food. They can lay their eggs into your food. Maybe some fur can come off from their bodies and be deposited onto the food. And sometimes they can die into, in your food, and their dead bodies become physical contaminants. So we need to have good pest control procedures within our food catering establishment. And then what can we do to prevent food poisoning? Obviously, the first one would be temperature control. First of all, you'd need to ensure that the food that you are serving is adequately cooked. I think earlier this year, I think I heard it on the news, there was something to do with someone having died and others got hospitalized after they ate undercooked turkey. I think it was somewhere in the UK recently. So you need to make sure that your foods are adequately cooked to prevent situations like that. And also you need to minimize the time that your perishable foods are exposed to the danger zone temperatures. We said our danger zone is between 8 degrees Celsius and 65 degrees Celsius. So you need to make sure that food that should be served cold, or if you're keeping any food, you need to make sure that the food is kept at a temperature below 8 degrees Celsius. And if you're going to keep your food hot, you need to make sure that your food is above the 65 degrees Celsius. So to monitor the temperatures, you can make use of a probe thermometer or a food thermometer. Make sure that your food is not within the danger zone temperature range. And also, it is recommended that when you're cooling food, because sometimes there may be some leftovers that you want to store. So it's a hot dish, it's at a temperature above 60 degrees Celsius, and you need to store it now into 2 hours. So it needs to cool from a temperature above 65 or 60 degrees Celsius within 6 hours. You need to bring it down to at least 8 degrees or less within 6 hours. And the recommended process is that within 2 hours, it needs to have reached 20 degrees Celsius or room temperature. And then from room temperature to refrigeration temperatures of 8 degrees Celsius or so, that needs to occur within 4 hours. So in total, your food needs to cool from 60 to 8 degrees Celsius within 6 hours. So you can make use of maybe shallow containers to increase the cooling process in a ventilated area. So that's just one method of cooling your food. And then you need to avoid cross-contamination. And you can do this by keeping food covered until it's used. You need to practice good personal hygiene. You need to ensure that raw and cooked foods are kept separate. And also you shouldn't mix old and new food at all. So let's say maybe you prepared a dish earlier this morning, and then you prepared another one at lunchtime. and you happen to have leftovers from those two sets of dishes that you've prepared. So you shouldn't mix the two, because obviously the older one will obviously have maybe more bacteria, so to speak, than the new one. And then if you're now mixing, you're also creating changes in temperature there, and then you increase the chances of bacterial proliferation and hence bacterial food poisoning. Then you're supposed to use separate equipment and utensils when preparing raw meats, poultry, and seafood. And you're supposed to clean and sanitize all equipment, utensils, and food surfaces. And then you're supposed to practice good personal hygiene. We've talked about aspects of personal hygiene, but maybe the ones that we didn't talk about unnecessary. So you shouldn't touch food unless you have a reason, a good reason to do so. You shouldn't touch food unnecessarily. And you should avoid touching your face and hair during food preparation, because your face obviously has got some maybe bacterial cells, and you'll be then contaminating your food, the food that you're preparing. And you're not supposed to taste food with your fingers or to double dip with a spoon. Double dipping is whereby you are taking, maybe you want to taste a dish, and you're taking a spoon, putting it into the dish, and then bringing the spoon to your mouth. And then after that, instead of discarding the spoon, you're putting it back into that dish. So you are contaminating the dish with maybe bacteria that might have been present on your mouth through the spoon. And then if you are wearing gloves during food preparation, you need to ensure that you change those gloves frequently, because if you don't change them frequently, there's so many things that you're touching, and wearing gloves doesn't mean that you are preventing any contamination, because if you touch something that's contaminated and then you touch your food, then you are contaminating that food through the gloves. So you need to make sure that the gloves are changed frequently as well. Just like your hands, you need to wash your hands frequently. And then you need to make sure that your food premises are always kept clean. There should be cleaning practices that are constantly taking place. And this is essential for the safe operation of your food business. The cleaning must be continuous and ongoing. You need to thoroughly clean and sanitize all food surfaces and equipment with hot water, detergent, and chemicals such as sanitizers. And do keep in mind that some detergents do not kill bacteria, but bacteria will only be killed in the presence of hot water as well as a sanitizer. And you can have a cleaning schedule which you need to implement to ensure that cleaning is conducted on a regular basis. And you should have good pest control practices. For example, you need to make sure that your premises are adequately sealed to prevent maybe pests from coming in. And by keeping your premises clean, you are starving those pests, and you're making sure that you're not giving them grounds to survive within your food catering establishment. And you need to throw them out by conducting regular pest inspections or services. And you need to make use of pest baits for that, such that should any pests come into your food catering establishment, the pest baits will take care of that pest. And you need to remove any unnecessary equipment or items either within your food catering establishment or the surroundings. You shouldn't give these pests a home. So any unnecessary equipment that is not being used should be removed. And if you see any pests, those should be reported, or any evidence of pest activity, those should be reported to management, so that at least pest control activities or appropriate pest control activities are initiated. And you also need to manage your waste to prevent bacterial food poisoning. So you can place waste in a plastic-lined bin. You should remove all waste from premises frequently. You need to make sure the bins are emptied regularly and they are always kept clean. And any external bins should be kept covered and also protected from pests and birds. Because if the bins are left open, the pests can make a home within those bins. Okay, that's that with bacterial food poisoning. We move on to chemical food poisoning. So how do chemicals enter food, or where do chemicals come from when they begin to contaminate our food? So this usually occurs through the negligence or ignorance of food handlers. So you can have chemicals being spilled on food or near food. You can have chemicals being mistaken for food or drink. There was actually a case recently in our town where a lady was preparing porridge, and she put what she thought was sugar into the porridge. And then only after some family members had passed away and some of them had been taken ill, that's when it was discovered that what she thought was sugar was actually some kind of red poison. So you need to make sure that whatever chemicals that you have are appropriately labeled to avoid mistaking those chemicals for food. And any equipment, the equipment that you have in your catering establishment should be correctly rinsed after cleaning, so that you avoid having traces of maybe detergent or some cleaning chemical remaining within that equipment, and hence gets transferred to food when that equipment is used during food preparation. And any non-food grade oil should not be used when you are lubricating your kitchen equipment. So you need to make sure that whatever chemical maybe that are right. So to prevent chemical contamination, you need to make sure that you rinse your equipment and your utensils thoroughly after cleaning. You need to store cleaning chemicals and other substances in sealed containers, preferably in cupboards away from food. And you need to make sure your hands are washed thoroughly after you handle chemicals, and you should follow whatever instructions are on that chemical container. And make sure that the chemicals bear the correct labels. And don't put chemicals in food containers or drink bottles, because you then run the risk. Then moving on to physical food contamination. Where do physical contaminants come from? So you have your sources being people, and you have examples such as hair, jewelry, buttons. So to prevent these, like we said, good personal hygiene needs to be practiced. And equipment, the kitchen equipment can result in bolts maybe falling off, nuts falling off, maybe peelings from maybe metallic equipment or some plastic equipment within your catering establishment. And then these become physical contaminants within your food. And then you also have the pests through their droppings, their fur, their eggs, yeah. And you can, or maybe even their dead bodies, they can become physical contaminants in food. And then moving on to allergies. The common signs and symptoms for allergies are tingling or itching in the mouth, hives, itching or eczema, swelling of the lips, face, tongue, and throat or other parts of the body, wheezing, nasal congestion or trouble breathing, abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, dizziness, lightheadedness, or fainting. So those are just some of the symptoms or signs from people who are allergic to certain types of foods. So how can we prevent these allergic reactions? You need to know the ingredients in the food that you're selling. And you need to be honest about these ingredients and the preparation conditions when you are asked. So you shouldn't hide about the contents of the food that you're serving. And when a customer highlights an allergy to a food, you need to make sure that that food does not come into contact with any of the ingredients which are to be used in his meal. And then the effects of food poisoning. You have effects on the consumer and the economy, whereby you can have productivity loss. So the adults that maybe get food poisoning from your food, that can result in productivity loss through work absenteeism. And also the victims can incur medical expenses as well as hardship and suffering. And if they are unlucky, they can become permanently disabled, and some of them may even die. So those are some of the effects that can result from food poisoning. And then to your food business, obviously you'll develop a bad reputation, which will result in loss of revenue and maybe result in business closure. And also legal action may be taken against you, which can also result in penalties. Okay, so in conclusion, it's essential that food handlers have the required skills and knowledge of food safety and food handling controls to minimize the risks of food poisoning. And as a food handler in a food catering establishment, you have the responsibility to ensure that the food that you're serving to your customers is safe and suitable to eat. And I would like to believe that if we follow the basic food hygiene practices, we can reduce or maybe even eliminate the cases of food poisoning around the world. So basically that brings us to the end of my presentation. I hope at least maybe some people within the food catering establishment have gained something in maybe they've been reminded about certain things that they need to be doing as they are preparing our food. And I hope at least my presentation has made a positive impact somewhere. So thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was fantastic. It was really great. In terms of the streaming, there was a few bits of buffering here and there for people, but all in all, it was fantastic. I learned a lot. I think I can comply with most of it, apart from maybe the double dip, especially when there's chocolate involved.
Okay. You can't avoid the double dipping.
And dipping my finger in. I'm afraid I'm going to have to. I'm all right to do that in my own home.
You have to stop that, Simon. Okay? Sorry?
Am I okay to do that in my own home?
No, you can't.
No.
You poison the whole family, Simon.
Okay. A few questions have come through already.
Okay.
Somebody said, can we use this information in food manufacturing companies?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
I think most of it can apply in the food manufacturing establishments as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, things like pest control,
yes,
good housekeeping, hygiene, hand washing.
Yes, personal hygiene.
All those things apply, don't they? So
yes, they do.
Yeah, so I think this presentation is good right across the food industry, not just restricted to catering. I've got another question. Let me just have a look. Should we use batch codes to separate which food was cooked first? Should we use batch codes of some sort?
Yes, when you prepared that food.
Sorry, Elizabeth?
Sorry, I was saying that it's good to have some kind of batch system, and you can make use of the dates. Like when you prepared the food, you can just log the date of preparation on that particular food before you store it, so that at least it gives you an indication of how old that food is when you now want to use it.
Yeah, someone mentioned, someone sort of answered that and said there's like a dot system. You can use a dot system or something. I don't. It's like a sticker with a dot. Maybe it's coloured dots to say which, something like that, a colour code system. What else have we got? Somebody's, I think it was Marco, asked, is some because you mentioned about jewellery, what jewellery is allowed. So he was saying, is some jewellery acceptable? What jewellery is acceptable?
I think the only thing that's acceptable in a food establishment is a wedding band, a simple wedding band that will probably get washed as you do your hand washing. And any other jewelry is not allowed. Watches are not allowed. Any necklaces and earrings are not allowed because they also run the risk of physical contamination. So a simple wedding band around your finger is acceptable because when you're hand washing, the washing will take care of the damage that can be accepted in most food establishments. So anything else, is not acceptable.
I think in a lot of places, well, in food manufacturing, in a lot of the standards, you're allowed a plain wedding band, and one pair of circular earrings, but that's all, I think. So, somebody's asked, also mentioned actually, what about, when you're talking about cooling cooked foods down within 6 hours to bring it down to, I think it was 8 degrees, I think you said.
Yes.
Somebody said, what about direct cooling, rapid cooling? Is that a way of doing it quickly?
To my knowledge, I don't think if you've got a way of cooling it rapidly, I think it's acceptable. The faster
Yeah.
it cools, the better.
But most people don't have things like blast chillers and things like
Yeah,
that, do they? You
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. So that's why they say at least 6 hours is sufficient to cool your foods. And you also to promote the cooling, you need to put it in small batches so that it cools quicker.
Just a question from me. If
Yeah,
I leave a pizza, half-eaten
yeah,
pizza,
yeah,
on the side, and
yeah,
get up in the morning,
yeah,
say 8 hours later, am I
yeah.
okay to eat that?
You run a risk. It's risky to eat that food. I wouldn't recommend you to eat it, especially if you've just left it at room temperatures and you're in a hot climate like I am. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, well, I did the right thing by throwing it in the bin then, I think.
yes.
Um, by the way, when people were saying hello before, I just wrote down a few of the countries that people were from, and listen to this
Okay.
for a list. People attending today are from a lot from the USA, Canada, UK, but then Jamaica, Namibia, Cuba, Brazil, Scotland, Oman, Turkey, Greece, Ghana, Cameroon, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, South Africa, Denmark, the Philippines, Indonesia.
Wow.
That's truly
Wow. Yeah,
international,
that's
isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
That's a
yeah.
real
And I
English.
hope everybody from all those countries at least managed to get something to take away from this presentation.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. Somebody asked, how do you identify salmonella? How do you identify it? Um,
Um, Bacteria, you cannot see bacteria with the naked eye, but obviously sometimes when food is contaminated to such an extent that it's now starting to rot, you can probably see some signs that you have, like a microbiological lab where you're using proper media to actually identify that this is salmonella. But you cannot identify it just by looking. But you can see signs that probably there has been some bacterial manifestation due to maybe, sometimes you have bubbling in soups,
yeah,
sometimes, yeah. But sometimes when the population hasn't got to such a stage, the food will just be looking normal, yet it's already contaminated and is capable of causing food poisoning. So bacteria you cannot identify with the naked eye. You'd need to go to the extent of maybe a microbiological tests.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like swab tests and things like that.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I've got to mention, I'm getting in trouble. I've got to mention Guatemala and Egypt as well. Okay, so I've done
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to add to the countries. Somebody said about when there was a child, the mum used to thaw meat on the side and not in a refrigerator. Is it
Yeah.
okay to thaw meat just on the side and I suppose?
No.
Oh
No,
no.
it's not recommended. No.
Oh
But I understand that you can thaw meat under running water. I think that's acceptable under running water, but
right.
not to just put meat on the counter shelf at room temperature. That's not recommended
No.
because obviously the outside will start to defrost before the inside does, and then you have
Yeah.
bacterial contamination manifesting on the outside.
Well, even if, for example, say it was a big joint of beef and you was going to cook that for a few hours, you know.
No, no,
Oh,
because like I said, there are two aspects to bacterial food poisoning. You can get bacterial food poisoning through the population of the bacteria or through the toxins that are produced. So even though
oh,
you cook the food, you also run the risk of the toxins causing food poisoning because the
wow.
toxins may still be present after cooking.
Tell you what, I'm learning something today. You're
That's good.
you're saving lives, Elizabeth. Um,
I hope so,
just
Simon.
just let me read this one out as well.
Okay.
Do you do you have any specific requirements while transporting food in the food catering truck? What about transporting food in a food catering truck?
Okay, I'm assuming
Did you?
probably he's talking about hot food as well as cold food, maybe if you've got some salads as well. So there are no exceptions, Simon. If you've got hot food, you need to find a way of keeping it above 65 degrees Celsius. And your cold foods, you need to find a way of maintaining them below 8 degrees Celsius. So there are no
Right.
exceptions with regards to microorganisms.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, that's the point actually. HACCP
Uh-huh.
is obviously a big thing.
Yeah.
Are you advocating a HACCP approach to catering as well?
Yeah, probably, but you find that there are not that many. Maybe the only critical control point would be the temperature. So
Yeah.
where you can identify critical control points, please do and do put measures to ensure that they are taken care of.
Yeah. But would you not
Yeah.
would you expect if you went, for example, into a catering, a lot of catering places are very small, aren't they? Tiny
Yeah.
businesses. Would you
Yeah.
expect them to have a documented HACCP plan? I suppose the
Um,
first, yeah. Would,
Sorry, Simon, I think I've lost you.
I'm just saying that, a lot of catering businesses that
Yeah.
can be very small. So would you
Yeah.
expect to see a documented HACCP plan, or with all the personal hygiene, the prerequisites, the good practice on heating and cooling, should that take us 99% of the way?
No, no. In my opinion, I don't think all that is necessary. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I stand to be
Okay.
corrected though.
Yeah, I think in some places, I think in the UK,
Yeah.
the food standards, they do expect HACCP to be undertaken, but I don't know.
By
I
even
don't
small
really know to
establishments.
what level. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean,
All right.
well, for example, it'd be very difficult for a hot dog
Yeah.
seller on the
Yeah.
street to have a HACCP
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, I
Yeah.
think I'm not sure about any more questions. People are making a few comments. No, I think that's it. But it's thanks. Somebody Lexter has said thanks, Elizabeth. Presentation was completely delivered. Hope all catering industry will become brilliant at the basic, because this is our stepping stone to deliver ready-to-eat food wherein food safety is within. Well, that's
Yeah.
a
Thank you.
perfect statement, Lexter.
Statement. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a great basic overview, and well, as you can tell, I've learned a fair bit from that.
Yeah.
So there's no more questions. Somebody's put actually, Safer Food, Better Business is a documented system based on HACCP principles, but specifically designed for catering retail premises. Visit food.gov.uk. That's Charlotte Neeson. What I'll do is I'll copy these comments and links and things, and we'll put them in the on the discussion forum so people can see that. So there are
Okay.
some. I know there are some free documents there that people can get their hands on. Okay. Well, it's all gone quite well, Elizabeth, I think. So I just want to say
Yeah.
thanks very much on behalf of all the attendees today, and
Yeah.
on behalf of the IFSQN and from me, Simon.
Okay.
So
You're
thank you,
welcome.
Elizabeth.
You're
I can't
welcome.
wait.
Thank you as well for the opportunity.
Great, and I can't wait. You're coming back again another 3 times during the year, so
Yeah.
we'll be seeing you again.
All right.
Can't wait.
All right.
Okay, so thanks very much.
All right. You're welcome. Good night,
Cheers.
everyone. Good
Bye
night.
bye. Cheers.
Bye.